Brexit Britain to the world.
Yes, hello there. Welcome to Balls Radio for Monday, the 12th of February, 2018. And today we ask the question, should we nationalise the railways? Which, of course, is what Jeremy Corbyn wants to do. But, you know, Jeremy Corbyn would nationalise everything if he could. He'd nationalise his own mother if there was an opportunity, if there was political gain from it. But how much better would the trains be if they were nationalised? And, you know, we don't have to look far for one example of a nationalised transport infrastructure in this country that seems to be doing quite well. Transport for London. So we'll look at the numbers of that and see how well that's performing against those privatised railways, which always seem to be struggling. And, you know, what a crazy idea anyway, franchising local monopolies. So already you can tell what direction I'm going to take on that one. Or should we wait? Should we nationalise our railways, or should we wait for Hyperloop? I mean, here is a man who knows how to deliver, unlike many of these rail companies. Elon Musk has, of course, put, through his company SpaceX, put a car orbiting the sun, a Tesla, which is a pretty neat PR stunt. It got him in all the newspapers. Of course, it wasn't just the fact that there is now a Tesla orbiting the sun for no readily apparent reason. It's the fact that he managed to create a rocket to get it up there with private money, which and very cheaply, you know, considering how much it costs to do those things. So there's an example of private enterprise doing something perhaps better than government money, and there's been a squillion of it spent on getting us into space. So maybe Elon Musk is the man who's going to get us on Mars. But in the meantime, a pretty neat PR stunt. And, of course, promoting not only the rocket, but his Tesla now orbiting the sun. Why don't British car manufacturers have this vision? Or European or any other car manufacturer? I mean, imagine a Kia, for example. You got a bit of publicity for a Kia. Perhaps not orbiting the sun, because it would probably fall apart, but orbiting the Hanger Lane gyratory system. At least it's a start. And it would probably take about the same amount of time as an orbit of the sun. Just, you know, a Kia just perpetually going around the Hanger Lane gyratory system from now to eternity, or until the Tesla stops orbiting the sun, which I suspect will be never. But in the meantime, Elon Musk almost certainly will get a flag planted on Mars. He has said he won't rest until that happens. And he seems like a determined young man, I'd say. A determined young man with prospects. So maybe he will be the one who gets people to live on Mars. And I was thinking about this last weekend, because he's going to want to put people on Mars. They're going to live, we assume, in some sort of big glass dome with lots of plants inside and water and lots of happy people. And I was there last week at Centre Parks with the kids. So I think he should go into partnership with Centre Parks. They've got the dome. He can get people to Mars. We were at Longleat last week, which, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we might as well have been on Mars, except the weather was probably worse in Longleat. But if you're going to be in Mars for the rest of your life with no hope of return, you know, what are you going to do inside your glass dome? You probably want to have a few fun water rides, a few slides, some rapids you can go along, a nice warm jacuzzi. They've got it all at Centre Parks, who are not paying for this endorsement, by the way. But Centre Parks Mars, book now. Elon will get you there. And, of course, we all know, you know, you can survive on Mars, theoretically, because that movie, The Martian, with Matt Damon, you know, scientists say a lot of that was actually factually correct. It wasn't hashtag fake news. This was real stuff. All you need to do is plant your food in your own excrement. Not sure about the cooking at Centre Parks. I didn't ask too many questions. How are you managing to serve food in this dome? Well, they just get a delivery truck. But if it was Centre Park Mars, maybe they'd have to resort to the Matt Damon approach. Now, there's an appetizing thought. Yeah. Eating food from your own excrement. Now, look, now we have lowered the tone from the very start. What about this then? From the metro.co.uk website. A man has been rushed to hospital in China after his rectum falls out. The headline, in fact, is, and this is why you've got to be careful of the headlines, man's rectum fell out when he spent too long playing on his phone on the toilet. I hasten to add, it didn't fall out because he spent too long on his mobile phone sitting on the toilet, he did have a condition, I'm not sure what it was called, rectum expungio, or something like that. I just made that up, but it does sound convincing, doesn't it? Anyway, so be careful on the choice of words when you're reading newspaper headlines, because it was man's rectum fell out when he spent too long playing on his phone on the toilet. Not man's rectum fell out because he spent too long playing on his phone on the toilet. So it doesn't follow. It was about half an hour. It's not a given that if you spend more than half an hour sitting on the toilet playing on your phone, your rectum's going to fall out. So don't worry about that today. And I can see why that would be a concern, because Brits spend twice as long on the toilet each week as they do spend exercising. Well, there we are. There's two ways of losing weight. You could, lose on the toilet or lose exercising. Adults clock up, on average, 3 hours and 9 minutes on the loo per week, but spend just 90 minutes advertising. We are just full of facts, as you know, on Balls Radio. So there we are. Just be careful. When you're sitting on the toilet, your own internal organs don't drop out. That is the message you can take home today. Look, while we're talking about unusual medical conditions, this is becoming the podcast equivalent of embarrassing bodies, isn't it, really? Only a lot better because you actually don't have to see it. But look, the Jeremy Vine show this week, you've probably never heard of it, but you've probably never even heard of the radio station. It's Radio 2. A few people apparently listen to it, but there's a man, Jeremy Vine, who does a chat show. He's actually pretty good, Jeremy. I don't mind a bit of Jeremy Vine. He was interviewing a guy who suffered from, and I'm almost certainly pronouncing this wrong, superior canal descience syndrome, or superior canal descience syndrome, or descent syndrome. Shall I try again? No, that'll do. That last one, whatever I said. Anyway, it's a condition where you apparently can hear the sound of your eyeballs moving. You know all those sounds that you sometimes hear internally when you've got a bad cold, and it gets, and you hear your voice from the inside. Well, with this canal descent syndrome, there we are, I had another go. You can hear all sorts of your internal sounds of your body. So you hear your heartbeat, you hear your creaking joints, you hear the chewing is apparently deafening, all heard very loudly in the ear. And yes, the sound of your eyeballs moving. That would drive you mad, wouldn't it? You just want to look straight ahead all the time. So how unfortunate. This guy was being interviewed, or someone was talking about it, with Jeremy Vine. And then following the interview, innocently I'm sure, was this song called How Bizarre.
Ooh, baby, it's making me crazy. It's making me crazy. Every time I look around. Every time I look around.
It's driving me crazy every time I look around. After talking about somebody who's driven mad because they can hear their own eyeballs moving. That is just taunting people who have superior canal descent syndrome, which sounds that much more convincing. Now try it for the fifth time. That's the song that Jeremy Vine played from How Bizarre, or the song's called How Bizarre, from OMC. There we are. Look, and let's get on to nationalising railways now. On Balls Radio. Yes, thank you. Yes, the railways, water, gas, electricity. Jeremy Corbyn wants to nationalise the lot of them, put them back into public hands rather than leaving them out there for public profiteering, which, maybe isn't a bad idea. Particularly if we look at one rail network that has never been privatised in Britain. And I think this is an interesting case study because it does seem to work pretty well. Well, it's expensive. And we complain about it, but it is about the same as the public transport in many other European cities. I'm talking about the London Underground, of course, and it's one of the world's largest underground rail networks. It's also one of the world's oldest, opened in 1863. It is incredible that something that was opened back then is still operating efficiently today. The London Underground we're talking about, of course, 11 lines, 402 kilometres of track, 270 stations, 1.4 billion passenger journeys a year. And it seems to work, doesn't it? It's increasing every year. We are pushing more capacity onto this network built in 1863. Not all of it, obviously, but we keep on adding to it. That's the other great thing. We have infrastructure investment and more people are using it. The number of passengers increasing every year, up 2% last year. It loses about £400 billion a year, which sounds like a lot. The government does have to step in. But guess what? They're spending more than that. They're spending £500 million maintaining the roads in London. So they're actually spending more on the roads than they are subsidising the rail network. And, of course, we're all paying for the petrol and buying our own cars. That seems like a much better deal, doesn't it? That investment in public infrastructure. And it's cheaper to maintain the rail network, this underground railway network, this old railway network, than it is to run the buses on London's roads, even though the cost of running buses doesn't include the cost of the roads they run on. Whereas obviously on the rail network, it's all included. So I think it's a bit of a bargain. And they make £4.8 billion a year from fares. And as I say, they get about 400 million of government money to cover those 1.4 billion journeys. So that amounts to a government subsidy of about 30 pence per journey. Now, given that there are people who are not on the roads, so that cost would instantly be transferred to the costs of congestion, lost time, and maintaining the road network, 30 pence per journey in government subsidy doesn't sound too bad, does it? Contrast that with First Rail, a privatised company that runs a whole bunch of rail networks up north, like Great Western Railways and, well, not all just up north, obviously, but outside London, the Transpennine Express. They're one of the bigger rail franchises. They pull in £2.5 billion. So about half the size of the London Underground. But they make a profit of £110 million out of that. That's about a 5% margin, which is not a huge margin, but it is a fairly secure business. I mean, you've got a government sanctioned geographic monopoly. Even with that protection, though, and, a fairly clear idea of how many people are going to travel on your rail network, even that has not prevented some companies from failing in the past, like the East Coast Main Line. It fell apart back in, when was it, 2009? We had National Express operating it. They couldn't deliver. It went back into state-owned operation, and then it was handed out again to Virgin and Stagecoach. So, look, we've got a track record of this privatisation of railways not working at all. You remember Railtrack was the private owner of the whole rail network, and then other companies were running trains on the Railtrack-owned network, and we had all these crashes. It was deemed unsafe, and that was brought back into public hands. But look, when you've got a privatised business making £110 million profit, that is £110 million that could be ploughed back into development. And this is the point that I think Jeremy Corbyn is trying to make. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is right on everything. There's lots of things he's wrong on, but the idea of privatising, and I'm not sure about privatising other utilities like water and electricity, but maybe he's got a point there too. But certainly when we look at transport, £110 million that's made by a profiteering company to push back to shareholders, paying dividends, or other investors, whereas Transport for London, that £110 million would be spent back on infrastructure. And we're seeing Transport for London are investing heavily. We've got the Crossrail project, Crossrail 2. We had the extension of the Northern Line, improvements to various underground stations, plus Transport for London, and here's the other key thing, it's part of a coordinated strategy that involves trains, the buses, cars, bikes, taxis, walking even. When you get outside London, you've often got one company running buses, like Stagecoach, for example, and another one running trains, like South Western Railways, which is third owned by the Hong Kong Railway Corporation, which is 75% owned by the Hong Kong government, which is really Chinese money. So the profits leave the country. We have state-owned enterprises running privatised operations here because we don't want to run it by our own state. So we are repatriating money back to a foreign government. Tell me how that makes any sense. And, of course, in amongst it all, there's a lot of fat cats taking extraordinary salaries out of the businesses. Take First Rail, for example. Their CEO gets £1 million a year. £1 million a year. The highest paid employer at Transport for London, employee, I should say, is Mike Brown, who's on £438,000 a year, which you might say, for somebody who's employed by the government, basically is a lot of money. But he's the highest paid. That includes all his bonuses. So he's getting less than $500,000 compared to, for a far bigger, for twice as big an operation, just on the underground alone. But then you've got to include the buses, which is even bigger, all the infrastructure investment that's going on, plus all the road networks. This guy is on less than half what the guy who's running First Rail is taking. So that sounds like a bit of a bargain for me. Now, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is quite right when he says it's going to cost nothing to nationalise these railways. I understand, I mean, the argument is that they are all on timed franchises. So when the franchise runs out, the government regains control. But of course, when the government regains control, they've still got to buy the rolling stock, presumably from the previous franchise. They can't run a railway without trains. I don't know a lot about the business, but I'm fairly certain on that one. So you've got to pay. It's not going to be free, but there was a valuation, but it's not a lot of money. That's the thing. There's a valuation of buying Virgin Trains that I saw, the East Coast and West Coast main lines. This was a year or two back, valued it at £300 million. That is about 0.4% of the government's annual budget. And then, of course, these companies are actually making a profit. So we'll be able to take that profit and plough it back into investments to make better services. So it's £300 million investment now for the future profit of those railways and the ability to hopefully develop some sort of coordinated strategy. For example, we could start looking at, how rail infrastructure influences other factors like land use. Could we get more people to travel further into London? So therefore, London companies have got a wider base to call on for people they want to employ. If we could get cheaper, faster trains coming into London, then companies would have a bigger gene pool to pull on for brain power to make their companies more productive, as opposed to having to resort to those people who can afford to live in London, which would be people probably who don't have kids or don't want their kids to have any space to play in. So maybe make the fares a bit cheaper so people can come in further, make the trains faster so it doesn't take hours, make the trains more efficient, make sure they don't keep on breaking down, which keeps on happening with privatised railways. I mean, that would be one of the arguments, wouldn't it, for keeping them private, that they would run more efficiently than nationalised railways. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So what's wrong with having companies in London benefiting from more people with better lifestyles and helping to improve productivity of those companies by making people able to commute in further from London through a coordinated strategy? And we may decide that, well, we don't want them to work in London. We want to start developing towns outside London. Therefore, we need to develop a rail infrastructure that's going to work for them. You can't do that while those railways are operating in private hands. Because the alternative is we just have overcrowded trains, not really getting any better, charging a fortune. For example, and train fares have definitely got more expensive since they've been privatised. £300 for a peak time day return from Liverpool into London. In the 90s, it was about 55 quid. So allowing for inflation, that is a threefold increase. Just because you handed a monopoly to a private company. Duh. That's what happens. So it seems a no-brainer, doesn't it? Nationalise the lot of them. And if you want an example of how more dangerous railways have become since they were being privatised, have a listen to this.
He went straight through Edward Station and was so frightened that he ran right up Gordon's Hill without stopping. After that, he was tired, but he couldn't stop. Percy had no driver to shut off steam and put on his brakes. I shall have to run till my wheels wear out, panted Percy. Oh dear, I want to stop, he puffed. The man in the signal box saw that Percy was in trouble, so he kindly set the points. Percy puffed wearily into a nice empty siding. He was too tired now to care where he went. I want to stop.
Yeah, I think we can take a few things from this, all from what we can assume is a privatised rail operation. First of all, he was scared. Workplace intimidation. I think that's the sort of thing that's got to be stamped out. I think Jeremy Corbyn would be very keen to get rid of that. Secondly, driverless trains, which is what this was all about. Cost cutting, and we see the dangerous repercussions of that. Thirdly, These are steam trains. No investment in new infrastructure or rolling stock. Clearly just creaming the profits without any future strategy. And then the exhaustion that we hear. Clearly no union controls. Nothing to stop the exploitation of the workers. And look, I can support my case with many other examples from the works of the Reverend Audrey. We've all read them. Why did we not see them clearly for what they were, which was books warning us of the dangers of privatised local monopolies at the risk of safety, efficiency and investment? The Reverend saw all of those things and he warned us through his writing, but we chose to ignore him. So, nationalisation, you know it makes sense. On the other side, of course, there is the question of innovation. I mean, we have the government building the HS2. It's costing £60 billion or so. You can argue whether that's a good thing or not, but it's only government money. They can print it. So why not if it employs people? But while they're doing that, which you'd have to say is perhaps yesterday's technology, you've got Elon Musk trialling Hyperloop, which could have us travelling through tunnels in a vacuum at 600 miles an hour, which is great. You just have to remember not to open the windows. That could have us from London to Glasgow in 45 minutes. Or even better, you could be out of Glasgow and back to London in 45 minutes. And the great thing is you're in a tunnel, so you don't have to see the West Midlands on the way through. Even better. So he stands a better chance of making that work here, I think. Getting, his, in effect, is a tunnel in a vacuum tube. He's more likely to get that working here than in America because nothing, even the fastest train in the world is not going to get an American out of his car and using public transport. So we're used to public transport here. Hyperloop, huge potential. So maybe that's what Jeremy Corbyn should be talking about. Admittedly, they've only got these things to go 190 miles an hour so far, and they've only gone 500 feet in the desert. But look, if this man can get a Tesla to orbit the sun, a Hyperloop train from London to the north is possibly less of a crackpot idea than, for example, Boris's idea to build a bridge to Europe. And it is the future. The future. Something governments are not very good at. I think it scares them. But bring it on, Elon Musk. Perhaps with government support if you need it. If that's what we need to bring it here. Make a huge difference, wouldn't it? That's Balls Radio for today. I'm Phil Dobbie. Catch you again next week.
Balls Radio of the UK. From a Brexit Britain to the world.